case of Shannon Starbuck. Shannon Starbuck, a 42-year-old woman, was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana, as the youngest child with two older brothers. Her parents eventually divorced and started new families, resulting in additional siblings for Shannon. On December 3, 2011, Shannon was discovered on the floor of her bedroom, positioned in a suggestive manner. An erotic massager was placed on her stomach, indicating a clear attempt to humiliate her after death. The police immediately suspected foul play due to the numerous bruises and scrapes on her body. A medical examiner later confirmed that some of the injuries were caused by a stun gun, and evidence suggested that her body had been moved. The official cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The detectives assigned to solve the case faced a difficult task. They needed to reconstruct the final hours of Shannon's life and identify the perpetrator. Shannon, a mother of 5, had been reported missing by her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, a day before her body was found. Clay, 47, had alerted the authorities that he had been unable to contact Shannon since December 1st at approximately 3 p.m. Shannon sent a text to her daughter saying she couldn't pick up the kids from school because she wasn't feeling well. She asked them to wait for their father, claiming she had already informed him of the change in plans. However, his phone was turned off, so he didn't know what was going on. The younger siblings, Marshall and Serena, were tired and hungry, so 15-year-old Logan decided to call her older brother Austin for help. She asked him to drive them to their father's house, which was just a couple of blocks away. When they arrived, Austin said he couldn't reach their mother either. He thought maybe she had turned off her phone to rest. Austin put the kids in the car and drove them to their father's house. Clay was surprised to see them but was happy to spend time with his kids. Since the older kids had lived with him after the divorce, and the younger ones had stayed with their mother, Clay decided to enjoy the unexpected visit and didn't contact Shannon. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened with her. Clay expected to see Shannon at the school basketball game that evening, but she didn't show up. The next day, December 2nd, Clay took the kids to school and then went to Shannon's house. The front door was locked and the blinds were closed. Since he didn't have a spare key, he couldn't get in. Clay sent a message saying that if Shannon didn't show up by 7 p.m., he would contact the police. After waiting until the agreed time, Clay went to the police station to report Shannon in Starbuck's disappearance. 2 sheriff's deputies visited her address but found nothing suspicious, so they returned to the station. The officer told Clay to wait one more day. If he still hadn't heard from Shannon after that, he should return to the station. The next day, Clay returned to the police station, and it was then that he discovered he wasn't the only one looking for Shannon. A friend and her mother had also reported being unable to contact her, which was unusual for Shannon. This new information prompted the police to take the case more seriously. It had been 48 hours since Shannon's disappearance, and several people were worried about her. The police visited Shannon's home again. Upon entering the residence, they found no signs of forced entry or robbery. Initially, everything appeared to be in order. However, when they entered Shannon's bedroom, they discovered the disturbing truth. Shannon Starbuck's disappearance was a result of a brutal murder. In her room, investigators found an unmade bed with a blanket nearby, but the sheet was missing, and the mattress cover had red stains. Her cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts examined the room for fingerprints, finding 12 latent prints on the massager box and bathroom mirror, while some surfaces had been wiped clean. DNA analysis was conducted on traces found in common areas, and specialists took scrapings from under Shannon's nails, face, and neck. Detectives believed the murder occurred after Shannon got out of the shower and her body was moved to the bed and then the floor. The missing sheet was found in the washing machine, suggesting the perpetrator tried to eliminate evidence. Clay arrived at Shannon's house by noon to find out what had happened to his ex-wife. However, the scene at her yard was ominous, with yellow tape cordoning off the area, an ambulance, and several police cars parked near the lawn. Clay was the first to be informed of the tragic event. To gather more information about Shannon and her lifestyle, the detectives questioned Clay after he had calmed down. He explained that he and his ex-wife had a morning routine where he would take the younger kids to school and she would pick them up afterwards. However, on December 1st, his car broke down a few blocks from home, disrupting their routine. Clay had texted Shannon to ask her to take the kids to school. It was supposed to warm up around 11 a.m., but when he tried to start the car again, it still wouldn't start. He gave up and went back inside to take a nap. Clay slept for several hours without being disturbed, during which time his cell phone ran out of battery. To support his story, he showed the police his correspondence with his ex-wife, Shannon. Initially, everything seemed to add up. Clay was cooperative, providing his cell phone, DNA, and fingerprints. He also expressed concern for Shannon, explaining that their divorce had made her more vulnerable. When asked for more information, Clay revealed that Shannon had joined a dating site after becoming single. As an attractive woman, she had many admirers. According to Clay, she might have been seeing multiple people at the same time, and one of them might have been responsible for her death. Unfortunately, he didn't have any specific names to share. During the conversation, Clay became emotional and cried, struggling to accept Shannon's death. After recording his statement, the police sent him home. He had to break the news of their mother's death to their children. At the start of the investigation, the case surrounding Shannon Starbuck's demise was gathering momentum. Investigators questioned the Shannon family's neighbors, focusing on every detail, especially reports of unfamiliar people and vehicles in recent weeks. An autopsy revealed severe injuries, including chest trauma consistent with the use of a stun gun, 10 broken ribs, and head and body injuries likely caused by a blunt object. The severity of the injuries made it difficult to determine the exact time of death, but the expert estimated that Shannon's life ended between December 1st, 2002. Scratches on her body suggested that she had been moved, and her broken neck bones supported this theory. The medical examiner found evidence of strangulation using a soft object, possibly a hand, towel, or sheet. A breakthrough in the case came from the analysis of body samples, which revealed male DNA. This suggested that the suspect might be one of Shannon's close male acquaintances, including her ex-husband or secret admirers. Clay Starbuck, her ex-husband, has cooperated fully with the investigation, including undergoing a medical examination to check for any injuries or harm. Detectives suspected that the perpetrator might have been injured during the struggle, but Clay showed no signs of injury on his hands. The investigators then examined their sons, 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake. The only issue that arose was the presence of old cuts on the older son's hands, but these were explained by his job at a window manufacturing plant. During conversations with the sons, some facts were established that would later become clearer. The children knew that after the divorce, their mother had been dating and they disapproved of it. They had seen explicit photos on their mother's laptop, leading them to wonder if she might have been targeted by an online predator. It was clear that the sons loved their mother and were deeply shaken by her death. However, they had disagreed with the changes she had been making in her life. In a subsequent interview, Clay expressed himself more clearly. He blamed Shannon's behavior for his family's problems while he was away on business, especially her frequent encounters with other men. Clay even suspected that Marshall might not be his biological son, but he loved him regardless. Clay believed that after their relationship ended, Shannon started to indulge excessively and not appropriately for her age. He disapproved of her dropping off the kids at his place when she went on dates. By this point, investigators had not only spoken to Clay and the children but also interviewed Shannon's relatives and friends. The detectives developed a more comprehensive understanding of the deceased and her family. Shannon had always dreamed of having a big, loving family. Growing up, she was a kind and modest person who loved to draw and was very good at it, winning many awards. At 20, she met 25-year-old Clay Starbuck in Florida, where she had moved with her family when she was young. Clay was on vacation from Alaska. They were introduced by friends at a party and hit it off right away. That night, Shannon learned a lot about Clay. He had gone to school in Colorado to learn about diesel mechanics and later worked on the Trans-Alaskan pipeline, which paid well. However, he was already married with 2 kids. Despite his complicated past, Shannon wasn't discouraged. She actually saw it as a plus, thinking it gave him valuable experience for their future together. Shannon and Clay got married soon after meeting. As Clay's new wife, she moved in with her husband. At first, she struggled to adjust to her new surroundings in the weather, but she quickly settled in. Shannon's married life wasn't as perfect as she had envisioned. Her husband Clay was often away, leaving her to manage the household by herself. However, her love for him gave her the strength to carry on, knowing that his work shifts would eventually end and he would return to her. In the meantime, she took on the role of mother to his children from his previous marriage and soon gave birth to their own son, Austin, followed by another son, Blake, 3 years later. In 1996, they welcomed a daughter, Logan, who was later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Shannon accepted her daughter's diagnosis with love and care, becoming her closest companion. The family was later completed with the arrival of another daughter, Serena. Shannon devoted herself to her children's well-being, education, and spiritual growth. She was also known for her cooking, crafts, and other hobbies within their community. However, she was so focused on being a caring mother and a loving wife that she didn't realize her husband was having an affair at work. When she discovered his affair, she felt deeply betrayed and shocked. This led her to file for divorce in 2000, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She still had feelings for her ex-husband, so she moved to Arizona to start fresh and eased the pain of their separation. There, she attempted to start a new relationship, but it didn't work out because she realized she still loved her ex, Clay. Clay was also reaching out to her and asking her to come back, claiming he had changed. Believing him, she gave him another chance. In February 2001, they had a son named Marshall, their 5th child. However, instead of strengthening their relationship, Marshall's birth created new tensions. Even when they formally remarried in February 2006, their relationship remained strained. 6 months later, the family moved to Deer Park, Washington. Clay's work kept him away, leaving Shannon to care for the children and manage the household. She kept her family entertained by organizing outings and parties at home. However, the frequent time spent apart put a strain on her marriage, creating doubts and mistrust that eventually led to a permanent separation in February 2010. Crossing into her 40s, Shannon started to rebuild her life with the hope of finding love again. She was determined not to give up or make the same mistakes as before. Even when her ex-husband Clay suffered a serious injury, Shannon chose not to go back to him. However, she still provided him with support and help. In February 2011, Clay quit his job and moved to Deer Park to be closer to his children in Chonnan. Although he hoped Chonnan would take him back, she didn't feel the same way. She had finally found freedom and was enjoying it. After Clay's surgery, Austin and Blake moved in with him, enjoying more independence from their mother. Shannon started a new chapter, finding a part-time job and enrolling in a dental assistant course to support her family since Clay stopped paying child support due to illness. The children stayed with Clay on Wednesdays and every other weekend. And by summer's end, Shannon completed her certification and was ready for her next goal. Shannon Starbuck had been seeking a fresh start, creating a dating profile in hopes of meeting someone special and leaving her past heartache behind. She regretted spending her best years with a man who didn't appreciate her and was capable of deceit. Tragically, her dreams were cut short one December morning when she became Shannon of a heinous crime. Her funeral, held on December 10, 2011, was attended by a large number of people, a testament to her bright and sincere personality. She was laid to rest at a cemetery in Orlando. The investigation into her death was swift, thanks to public attention. Detectives focused on her ex-husband Clay, verifying his alibi for December 1st. His fingerprints didn't match those at the crime scene, so they checked his story against databases and examined Shannon's phone, laptop, and diary for other potential suspects. Detectives thoroughly examined Shannon's mobile phone, leading them to add several individuals to the list of suspects. These men had been in contact with her through a dating site, raising suspicions about their potential involvement. One suspect, Tom Walker, had arranged a date with Shannon for December 5th, just hours before her death. Their conversations had been candid, and they had exchanged photos. However, when Tom Walker requested that Shannon take a photo using an adult toy, she declined. Notably, her body was later discovered in the exact pose that Tom Walker had mentioned. Within an hour, detectives located Tom Walker, who was shocked not only by the news of Shannon's death, but also by being considered a suspect. He promptly provided an explanation for his activities on the day of her death, which was corroborated by his colleagues in surveillance footage. The next individual on the list was John Wilson, who had scheduled a meeting with Shannon on December 1st. An examination of their correspondence revealed. The investigation revealed that the suitor, whose real name was John Kinlawn, had no intention of a serious relationship with Shannon and had used a fake identity. He was married and worked in a different field than he claimed, which explained his secretive behavior. When questioned, Kinlawn had an alibi for the time of the crime, which was corroborated, and he was released after providing a DNA sample. The investigation was back to square one, but a breakthrough came when detectives examined Shannon's mobile phone. They discovered that a 911 call had been made from the phone on the morning of December 1st, but it had been deleted from the call log. After retrieving the call, they found it contained only the sounds of sobbing and rustling before abruptly ending. Shannon's phone records revealed a failed call and 11 messages sent after her death. GPS data confirmed her phone was at home, where she was killed after dropping her kids at school. The suspect tried to mislead the investigation and was found to be close to the Shannon family, even using a nickname for the youngest son. After uncovering this information, Clay's statements were examined more closely. He had a clear motive for killing his ex-wife, as divorce can be difficult for some partners to accept. Additionally, he had the perfect opportunity, knowing her daily routine. As a result, authorities decided to track the suspect's car route again, this time using footage from street surveillance cameras. This is when the officer's suspicions became clearer. It turned out that Clay's car had not broken down. At the same time, results from another analysis arrived, showing that DNA material collected from Shannon's body matched the suspect's samples exactly. When Shannon returned home, a heated argument broke out, which ultimately led to her death. The unusual position of her body was a deliberate act of vengeance by Clay, who was enraged by her newfound freedom. After the murder, Clay stayed in the house and impersonated Shannon in text messages. It became clear that his intentions to harm her may have been long-standing. A friend's conversation with detectives took on new significance, revealing that Clay and Shannon's relationship was troubled. Shannon had confided in friends that she was tired of Clay's controlling behavior and criticism and had feared he might harm her if she ever left him. In fact, Shannon had contacted the police multiple times between June and November 2011, reporting that Clay was stalking her and making her feel unsafe in her own home. She had become so fearful that she refused to give anyone a spare key to her house. Ultimately, Shannon secured a restraining order against Clay, limiting their communication to text messages. A thorough examination of her diary revealed that she not only feared her former lover but also believed he was manipulating their children against her. Clay had been spreading vicious rumors and portraying her as promiscuous. As a result, when he was arrested on February 6, 2012, the children refused to believe he was involved. The discovery of a tracking program on Shannon's laptop, a hard drive labeled Shannon's desktop computer in Clay's house, and printed correspondences did not seem to disturb them. The older children questioned the authenticity of the DNA analysis, thinking the accusations against their father were unbelievable and the case was fabricated. However, law enforcement and other relatives had a different perspective. At the trial, the prosecution presented a substantial amount of physical evidence and testimonies, confidently demonstrating Clay's guilt. In June 2013, justice was served when Clay Starbuck was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life under aggravating circumstances and disrespect to human remains. He was sentenced to life without parole. His 2015 appeal was denied. He's serving time in Spokane County. Shannon's family grieves her loss, but the children siding with their father hurts more. His obsession led to revenge, leaving the children without a mother or father. Brett Ryan was born in 1981 in Canada into a warm and supportive family. His parents, Susan and Bill, and his three brothers formed a tight-knit household. Christopher and Leland were the eldest siblings, born in 1974 and 1979, respectively. Brett was the third child, followed by the youngest, Alexander, who was born in 1987. Bill was a calm man deeply concerned with mental health, teaching classes at a local community center to stay fit and healthy. He also worked as a budget director for the Toronto Star newspaper. Susan, Brett's mother, was a cheerful yet firm woman dedicated to household chores and raising her children. She had a passion for gardening and was an avid baseball fan. At 16, Brett graduated from high school and immediately enrolled at the University of Toronto with numerous plans. However, academics were not his only concern, as he was already worrying about money. He decided to work painting houses during the summer to cover his basic needs, buy clothes, and enjoy various recreational activities. People who knew Brett described him as always smiling and very polite. He was also very helpful, volunteering and refereeing minor league games at the local community center. Handsome and generous, he made friends easily. Despite his many attributes and above-average intelligence, university proved too challenging, and he eventually dropped out. Initially, this did not seem to affect him much, but reality soon caught up with him. While his friends built successful careers in fields like finance, healthcare, and education, Brett worked as a house painter. What started as a summer job became a full-time occupation. Behind his broad smile and worn-out paintbrush, desperation was growing. As one of the younger children, Brett lived with his parents and often received help from Bill, Susan, and his older brothers. His main issue was attempting to maintain a lifestyle that did not match his earning potential. At that time, Christopher was working with the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland, considered the artist of the family, was studying photography and playing the drums and guitar. Alexander, the youngest Ryan, was intelligent and excelled in his studies, even attending a school for gifted children. While his brothers' lives seemed to be on track, Brett's life was drowning in growing debt, and he soon felt overwhelmed. By February 2007, at the age of 26, his financial situation was dire, with debts exceeding $60,000. The crisis was not just financial. It spread to other areas of his life, leading to personal problems. He needed to increase his income urgently and spent hours thinking about what to do, which took a toll on him. Despite this, he projected a different image. Neighbors and friends saw Brett as a standout athlete, the life of the party, and often remarked that he was an extrovert in a family of introverts. Despite his worsening situation and periodic bouts of depression, Brett always tried to project a positive and strong image. He wanted to be admired, not pitied. However, the life Brett was living was far from what he had envisioned for himself. His erratic and criminal past began to unfold as he devised various plans. With above-average intelligence, instead of using it to earn extra income honestly, he embarked on a criminal career. The winning idea he had was to rob a bank. On October 20th, 2007, Brett walked into an ICBC bank disguised as a patient with bandages covering his face, wearing a hoodie and with his left arm in a sling. He limped and carried an envelope supposedly containing professional documents. When it was his turn, he handed the teller a note stating it was a robbery and that he was armed, demanding $2,000 or more. The teller gave him just over $1,000, but for Brett, it was a triumph. He spent the next 8 months robbing banks using the same method. Brett embraced the theatricality of his crimes, deciding to change his bandage disguise after the second robbery. He bought a high-quality beard and earned the nickname the Bearded Bandit in the media. He also wore a hat similar to the one worn by the protagonist of the show Gilligan's Island, paired with glasses, a checkered shirt, and a dark jacket. After planning his next heist, he struck again, obtaining between $2,000 and $3,000 in each robbery. After one of Brett's robberies, the police tracked his vehicle using an external camera and traced him back to his home. Several weeks later, when Brett Ryan approached another bank ready to make a withdrawal, the police had already been monitoring him for 15 days. He entered the bank, quickly turned around, and exited. Waiting outside were officers ready to arrest him. Brett pled guilty and spent the next 7 months in police custody awaiting trial. He was charged with 29 counts of armed robbery committed while disguised. In total, he had stolen $28,000. In January 2009, Brett found himself in a small, windowless room in the Ontario Court of Justice. Several close friends had written letters of support to the court detailing Brett's generosity and volunteer work, hoping to influence the judge's decision favorably. Although many charges were dropped, he was convicted of committing 8 robberies. The court sentenced him to 45 months in prison, minus the 7 months he had already served. The judge also imposed a lifetime ban on possessing any firearms, even though none were ever found or proven to be in his possession. Brett made his first request for parole as soon as possible, but the parole board denied it. The board believed he needed to address his depressive episodes to qualify for parole. Brett accepted the recommendations and began attending professional sessions to tackle his mental health issues. The board also noted Brett's efforts to reconnect with his estranged family, discussing his depression with them. It was hoped that acknowledging his problem to his family would help manage his episodes. However, one treating psychiatrist warned that Brett could develop a more severe form of depression due to its hereditary nature. At the next parole hearing, his mother, father, and one of his brothers attended. This was seen favorably by the board, along with the fact that Brett's treatment involved counseling rather than medication. The documents showed he received 7 counseling sessions with a psychologist during this time. The psychologist's report indicated that Brett did not need ongoing psychological therapy or supportive counseling, but had the option to return if necessary. The Canadian Parole Board members noted that Brett had complied with all conditions and maintained a low risk of reoffending, granting him full parole on November 24, 2010. Brett returned home to his family, ready to start anew. However, freedom brought challenges Brett was unprepared for. Outside prison, he found a harsher world than he had left. Unable to escape his debt, he declared bankruptcy. His criminal past was easily discovered by potential employers who Googled his name and found his history of disguises and bank robberies. Brett tried to resume his house painting business, but most potential clients refused to hire him due to his past. Approaching 30 years old, Brett struggled to escape his reality as an ex-convict with no higher education and few prospects. His mother, Susan, was upset by neighbors' comments about their family. She and Bill sold their house and bought a small bungalow in Scarborough. The family decided to move to start a new life away from their former neighbors' remarks, eager to leave behind the years of Brett's imprisonment. The Ryans made the most of their new home. Susan transformed the front yard into an elaborate garden filled with flowering plants, small shrubs, and a cat statue. Brett began taking steps to achieve the success he had always envisioned. He worked in low-paying retail jobs, but with some financial help from his parents, re-enrolled at the University of Toronto to pursue a degree in biophysics. He also made a concerted effort to be more open with his family. He visited a psychologist who emphasized that the lesson from his criminal past was to be honest with those closest to him. As the Ryans settled into their new community, they effectively started fresh. Each family member gradually resumed their activities. It seemed the storm had passed. Things were steadily improving each day. In September 2011, a friend set Brett Ryan up on a blind date with Kristen Baxter, a blonde and athletic physiotherapist. They met near her beachfront condominium. Kristen lived the happy life Brett desired for himself. She had a good job, a lovely home, and enjoyed hiking, traveling, and walking her dog. She was a pleasant young woman who looked like a magazine model, with a reserved smile that contrasted with her loud laughter when amused. Despite knowing Brett's criminal past, Kristen fell in love with him. By January 2013, they moved in together at her condo. Living with Kristen marked a significant change from his family's suburban bungalow. The condo was small but offered a stunning view of the lake beyond Toronto's islands. Brett could barbecue on the roof, watch planes land at the airport, and swim in the pool on the second floor, which had both covered and open areas. They frequently traveled to tropical places and enjoyed a dreamlike life together. However, fate had another twist in store for Brett. In 2014, his father, Bill, passed away, dealing a heavy blow. Brett's depression resurfaced, along with financial problems. Brett confided in his therapist, trying to follow their advice. Following Bill's death, Brett paid more attention to his mother, helping her with administrative tasks Bill had once handled, doing odd jobs around the house for extra money. He needed the money, especially after proposing to Kristen with a diamond ring. Once again, his finances were crumbling, and as his bank account dwindled, he began spinning a web of lies. As months and years passed, Brett continued working, studying, and maintaining his family and romantic relationships as best as he could. But in reality, he was struggling with his past problems and hiding everything from everyone. In 2015, he dropped out of university again but kept it a closely guarded secret. Kristen and her family believed he was still studying. He didn't even tell his therapist. By spring 2016, he received a job offer from a tech company in Toronto. This thrilled him, and he was convinced things would get better. He immediately told Kristen and his family, but within days, his past came back to haunt him. The company withdrew the offer after discovering his criminal record. Despite this, Brett convinced Kristen, his mother, and his brothers that he was still studying and had started the new job. As part of the deception, he dressed up and left home every day, leading everyone to believe he was managing his work and studies perfectly. He kept up appearances by smiling and doing everything possible to maintain his facade of happiness. On social media, he posted about various events, radiating joy, surrounded by friends, family, and his devoted girlfriend, Kristen. He portrayed himself as an extroverted, popular, and friendly person, but internally, he was under immense pressure, a ticking time bomb. In his desperate attempt to keep up appearances and show that everything was going well, Brett and Kristen agreed to get married on September 16, 2016. The date held special significance as it marked their first date in 2011. The wedding was to be held at a luxurious venue in Ontario, costing $100 per person. At this point, it seemed Brett had finally taken control of his life. His mother, Susan, was so proud that she often bragged about his achievements to neighbors. She spoke of his university degree, good job, beautiful downtown apartment, and upcoming wedding. Paradoxically, Brett depended more on his mother than ever. With so many financial demands on the horizon, he pressured her to take on more paying jobs at home. But even with Susan's help, Brett's situation was becoming dire. Less than a month before the wedding, after over a year of piling lie upon lie, Brett finally followed his psychologist's advice and confessed everything to his mother. Susan's world shattered as she listened to her son admit that he needed to secure a good job but required her full support as a mother until then. To Brett's surprise, instead of rescuing him, she issued an ultimatum. Susan told him he had to tell Kristen the truth and announced that she wouldn't give him any more money until he did. Cornered with no way out, Brett devised a sinister plan. Outwardly, he continued to appear as the most extroverted and friendly person in the group, but each day he felt worse. He tried to manage the fragile web of lies, knowing it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. Brett sought the right moment to talk and relieve himself of the burden, but days passed, and he didn't take the necessary step to come clean. Meanwhile, Susan constantly reminded him of the importance of honesty, especially with Kristen. She pressured him, saying that if he didn't speak up, she would. She revealed that she had discussed the situation with his 3 brothers, and they agreed with her. Unknowingly, Susan pushed Brett to the breaking point. She thought Brett would make the right decision but never imagined how wrong she was. While she saw a look of remorse on her son's face, Brett was contemplating the most terrible plans to cover his lies. Determined to keep Kristen in the dark, he would go to any lengths, fearing she wouldn't forgive him and would end the relationship. Brett felt he couldn't bear another failure and began plotting how to silence his family. Brett Ryan thought that if he could scare his family with threats, he might prevent them from talking. But as he perceived their determination to tell Kristen the truth, he concluded that silencing them permanently was the only solution. In his mind, he began devising a macabre plan involving a crossbow, a silent weapon. Acquiring one was relatively easy and wouldn't pose any significant problem, as it didn't require a permit. The court restriction against him wouldn't be an obstacle either. He just needed to be over 18 years old. In Canada, crossbows are commonly used for hunting activities, so Brett bought a second-hand one, leaving no transaction record. During one of his visits to his mother's house, he hid the crossbow among some debris in the garage, where a kitchen renovation was underway. On the morning of August 25, 2016, Brett was determined to end his anguish. He set up an elaborate mechanism to create the perfect digital alibi. He gathered his laptop, 2 4-pound weights, a wooden spoon, a digital timer, and an oscillating fan. He propped his laptop against the wall with the weights, taped the spoon to the fan, and positioned it so that the tip aligned with the enter key on the keyboard. He connected the fan to the timer, programming it to turn on in the morning. Each time the fan moved, the spoon would press the enter key, making it appear as if Brett was watching YouTube videos. He prepared a similar setup with his tablet, phone, styluses, 2 oscillating fans, and 2 timers. He taped a stylus to each fan and secured the tablet and phone to wooden boards with screws. When the fans turned on, the styluses would send pre-written messages, making it seem like Brett was home all day, watching videos and sending emails. The next step was to leave his house without being caught on any security cameras. He exited the condo by taking the stairs to a back alley, avoiding the cameras, and headed to the public transit terminal. He took a train, got off at Eglinton Station, and walked to his mother's house. He arrived at 10 a.m. wearing 2 pairs of jeans, one over the other. He carried a bag with extra clothes, a wig, a fisherman's hat, and several crossbow bolts. Susan was surprised to see him. She wanted to rest, as she was battling a cold, but engaged in conversation with her son despite her fatigue. Brett tried to persuade his mother to keep quiet, but she was determined to talk to Kristen. In minutes, they were arguing heatedly. Brett rushed to the garage with Susan following, insisting he tell the truth. She called Christopher, Brett's older brother, and warned Brett that he was on his way. That was the final straw. Brett attacked his mother, shooting her in the cheek and ear with a crossbow bolt. He then strangled her with a yellow nylon cord. Susan was 66 years old. After killing his mother, Brett hid her body under some debris, covering it with a tarp. He then loaded the crossbow and waited for his brother, Christopher. When Christopher arrived, Brett silently approached from behind and shot him in the neck, killing him instantly. He dragged his brother's body to the garage, placed it on top of their mother's, and covered them with the tarp. Christopher was 42 years old. Shortly after, his younger brother, Alexander, 29, arrived. Brett struck him in the neck with a bolt, leaving him severely injured. Leland, 37, was napping in his room but rushed downstairs upon hearing a scream. Adrenaline and rage fueled Brett, as he was determined to see his plan through. Leland thought Alexander had had an accident and didn't understand why Brett told him not to call for help. In seconds, a brutal fight ensued between the brothers, Brett intent on killing Leland, and Leland fighting for his life. Meanwhile, Alexander managed to drag himself to the front door. The intense fight took them through various parts of what was once a warm family home. They fought in the living room, dining room, and 2 bedrooms until Leland finally escaped, screaming for help, and ran to the neighbor's house. As soon as they opened the door, Leland stumbled in, asking them to call emergency services and ensure the police arrived quickly, before passing out. Meanwhile, Brett took a bottle of water from the fridge, not bothering to close the door. He sent an email to Kristen, saying he had ruined everything and everyone, apologizing for not controlling his mental and antisocial issues. He then walked like a sleepwalker and calmly sat at the entrance of the house, covered in blood from head to toe, realizing he had destroyed his world. Within minutes, police and homicide investigators arrived. Brett was sitting near Alexander, who was still breathing. Brett told the officers he should have taken Alexander to the hospital and added that there were 2 more bodies in the garage. He confessed to the murders, stating he used a crossbow. At that moment, the scene was swarming with police. Shortly after Brett's arrest, Toronto police entered Kristen's apartment and discovered the devices he had set up for his alibi. Initially unsure of what to make of them, They evacuated the building and called in the specialized threat response team. The specialists disconnected the fans and removed the pencils before the timers activated. They determined it was a ruse to make it appear that someone, in this case Brett, was using the devices from that location. The police stated that preliminary investigations revealed 3 deceased individuals, 1 female and 2 males, and an injured man who had been taken to the hospital. They also confirmed that they had the perpetrator in custody. The crossbow allegedly used in the attacks was recovered at the scene. They added that they would continue investigating to determine the motive and gather all evidence left at the crime scene to get a clear and objective view of what transpired. The community was shaken, saddened by the events, but also terrified. Most neighbors had lived in the area for 10, 20, or more years. In the days following the incident, everyone began locking their doors, and they came and went with caution and fear. While the neighbors grappled with a newfound sense of insecurity, Brett had to give statements to the police. He admitted to killing his mother and 2 of his brothers, but claimed his initial intent was only to scare them. He said that when he went to the garage for the crossbow, it was to intimidate his mother, but he lost control. When brought before the court, he waived his right to a preliminary hearing and pleaded guilty. He hired a renowned criminal defense attorney known for representing high-profile clients, particularly in criminal cases. Brett faced charges of 3 counts of first-degree murder with various aggravating factors. However, he argued that the charge for his mother's death should be second-degree murder, as he didn't intend to kill her. Regarding his brother Christopher, Brett admitted to first-degree murder, since he waited in hiding and ambushed him with the crossbow. For his brother Alexander, who arrived unexpectedly, he accepted a second-degree murder charge. In the case of Leland, he admitted to attempted murder and acknowledged inflicting multiple injuries. The trial was relatively brief. In the next hearing, Brett appeared before the jury and, through sobs, expressed deep regret for his actions, apologizing to his friends, Kristen, and especially his surviving brother, Leland. He vowed to use the time and opportunities presented to him, repeatedly saying how sorry he was. Brett insisted he hadn't intended to use the alibi devices, claiming he decided to talk to his mother instead. However, the expert report contradicted him, stating that the devices would have functioned to make it appear someone was at home watching YouTube and sending emails if they hadn't been disabled. The judge acknowledged Brett's immediate guilty plea and noted his apparent remorse and willingness to be accountable for his actions. The judge also remarked that Brett was, in a way, a victim trapped in a web of lies. Ultimately, Brett was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences for each murder, plus an additional 10 years for the assault on Leland. He would be eligible for parole in 2041 at the age of 60. Leland Ryan chose not to speak to the media but shared his anguish in court. He described the horror of fighting for his life against his own brother and then seeing his mother and brothers dead. He admitted struggling to sleep and living in constant sorrow and distress. Brett had believed in the fantasies he created in his mind, but when everything fell apart, instead of facing reality, he lost himself in a labyrinth of lies with the worst possible outcome. At 35 years old, Brett had been weeks away from marrying the woman of his dreams, living in a beachfront condo. Perhaps, if he had told the truth, Kristen might have understood. But now, that possibility is lost forever, as Brett destroyed every bridge with his terrible actions. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, one of 6 children in a large family. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise and chaos of the city. In the 1975, 14-year-old Christy spent most of her days socializing with friends and family, often going to the local neighborhood swimming pool. In late August, Christy babysat for a family friend on the evening of August 22nd. The next day, August 23rd, she woke up around noon and decided to go swimming to cool off. She invited her sister Kim to join her and they went to the residential area. While Kim went swimming, Christy relaxed on a deck chair. A short time later, Kim went ashore and found Christy nowhere to be seen. But Kim decided not to look for her and instead stayed at the pool. Surprisingly, when Kim returned home, Christy was not there. Hours passed and Christy still hadn't come home. Kim became even more worried. She decided to look for Christy and ran into a neighbor who told her that the police had found the body of a young woman a few miles away, but they had not been able to identify it. Kim rushed home to tell her parents, who immediately called the police to report Christy missing. It was very likely that the body found belonged to Christy, so the police directed them to the morgue for identification. Although it was difficult to recognize the identity of the body due to the severely bruised face, Christy's mother eventually accepted that the body was Christy's, her beloved daughter, thanks to the birthmark on her leg. Police later explained to the family what had happened. It turned out that at about 2:30 p.m. that same day, a man reported finding a body in the woods behind the local shopping center. He, his wife, and son had gone there to buy toys, but before entering the store, their son wanted to take a walk on the trail behind the building. This path was a popular walking path leading to a river, and the area was famous for its beauty. Together with his parents, the son went for a walk on this trail. During their hike, they came across a disturbing scene about 10 yards down the trail. A man was kneeling on top of someone and repeatedly beating him with a wooden object. When he saw the family, he immediately ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a seriously injured little girl covered in blood. His wife, who had medical training, checked the victim's pulse, but there was none. The father quickly went to a nearby shopping center and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided investigators with a detailed description of the suspect, who was a tall, slim young man with long black hair, wearing jeans shorts and boots, about 20 years old. Police created a sketch of the suspect based on their description and distributed it to patrol officers. However, the investigation of the crime scene yielded no results. The wooden object used as the murder weapon was found, but they discovered no other evidence linking the perpetrator. Notably, the victim's hands were tied with a telephone cord and her bikini top was pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were found next to her body. Despite these signs, forensic experts found no evidence that a sexual assault had occurred. Luckily, detectives were able to continue their investigation thanks to new information from Kim, who told them about a conversation between Christy and a friend, Carol. The police summoned Carol. Carol recounted to police a suspicious phone call she had received from a stranger claiming to be a local DJ. The man had called her to talk about a fake cheerleading competition at the state fair, which was supposedly being held behind the local shopping mall. He announced the event would start at 1:45 p.m. and had told Carol to wait for someone at the entrance to the forest trail. The police were skeptical about Carol's story, and when they dug deeper, they discovered many inconsistencies. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister, but they had run into Christy and her sister on the way. Carol then invited Christy to join her, and they left their sisters behind to go to the mall. However, when they arrived at the entrance to the woods, no one appeared, and Carol claimed that she had gone to the shopping center to ask for the time. When she turned around, Christy was gone. The police investigation revealed that there had been no cheerleading competitions in town, casting doubt on the reason for Carol and Christy's trip to the woods. Police suspected that the mysterious phone call might have been a ruse to lure Carol into the woods, but they were unable to trace the call to identify the caller. Further investigation revealed discrepancies in Carol's story. She claimed to have met Christy and her sister on the street, but Kim said they had been at the pool and Carol had come to meet them there. Additionally, Christy's mother reported a strange conversation with Carol later that evening, which raised further suspicions. Carol apologized to Christy's mother and revealed that she had been the intended target of a murder involving two people. However, she quickly retracted her words and left. Christy's mother reported this to the police. The police questioned Carol again, but she denied making a statement and stuck to her original story. Carol was then given a polygraph test, which did not reveal any signs of deception when Carol answered key questions. As a result, investigators shifted focus away from Carol and pursued other leads. Police intensified their search for the killer 3 days after Christy's murder. A police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus spotted a man who bore a striking resemblance to a sketch of Christy's killer. Patrol officers quickly called detectives to the scene and asked Jack to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, Jack Carmen, 25, agreed to go with them. However, The police soon realized that Jack was severely mentally disabled, with an IQ of about 50 points. Results based on many different tests. As a result, Jack had limited communication skills and could not read or write. He was cared for by a specialist medical facility and lived in a supervised apartment. Despite these challenges, detectives could not ignore the striking resemblance between Jack and the composite sketch of the suspect in Christy's case. The interrogation process was extremely difficult due to Jack's limited ability to understand and answer questions. Most of the time, he just answered with one word or stayed silent. The detectives began to question whether Jack was capable of fully understanding their questions. To improve the situation, they had to ask very simple and specific questions. After 6 hours of questioning, detectives were finally starting to get results. They were finally able to extract a confession from Jack. According to his testimony, on the day in question he had left his apartment, taken the bus to the shopping center and bought a shirt and pants. As Jack walked through the parking lot, he saw Christy sitting on a fence near the entrance to a wooded trail. He approached her, tied her up by tying her hands, and then dragged her into the woods where he carried out the assault. After the attack, Christy tried to run away, but Jack quickly caught up with her. He picked up a nearby piece of wood and repeatedly hit her in the head. Jack then ran to the main road in front of the shopping center and boarded the bus. The next day, police took Jack to the forest where he allegedly committed the crime. There, he pointed out the exact spot and provided specific details that only the perpetrator would know, including the fact that the piece of wood used to strike the victim broke in half. Investigators also verified the testimony, asking the couple who found Christy to identify the person they had seen on the day of the incident. Both identified the man they had seen as Jack. As a result, Jack was charged with multiple offenses, including assault and murder. The prosecution chose to include it in the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer negotiated a deal. In exchange for a life sentence, Jack would plead guilty before the judge, thereby avoiding execution. The case moved swiftly, with thousands of people following. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack was sentenced to life in prison. However, after the trial, public opinion began to shift, and many people started to question Jack's guilt. As more details about his confession and his background emerged in the media, people began to wonder whether he was truly capable of committing such a heinous crime. Those who knew Jack found it hard to believe that he was capable of the crime. He was a passive, timid, and compliant person who would agree to anything if pushed hard enough. In the past, he had even taken the blame for something he didn't do, like the time he claimed responsibility for breaking a boiler at a charity center, when in fact someone else was to blame. This behavior raised doubts about his ability to make a genuine confession to the crime. His supporters felt that the police must have manipulated him into confessing by feeding him information and asking pressured questions. For instance, if the police asked him if he hit the victim with a piece of wood, and he answered yes, they could use that as a confession. However, this approach can be unreliable, especially considering Jack's tendency to confess to anything when under threat. Even the mention of the electric chair was enough to make him agree to whatever the detectives wanted. Furthermore, the police took Jack to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, a married couple who later identified him at the police station. This raised concerns that the witnesses had been biased, as they had already seen Jack and knew he was a suspect, despite the police's claims that they never crossed paths. There were several red flags surrounding Jack's alleged involvement in the crime. For instance, the police failed to locate the bus driver or any passengers who claimed to have seen Jack on his way to the city center, which contradicted his own statement. Moreover, multiple people at the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked said to have seen him at around 1:30 p.m. This created a major timing issue. Even if Jack had left immediately after being seen by these witnesses, the bus ride to the shopping center on the outskirts of town would have taken at least 40 minutes. Given the crime was committed at 1:50 p.m., it was logistically impossible for Jack to have made it on time. This cast serious doubts about Jack's guilt and raised suspicions that the police may have coerced his confession. Christy's parents, too, began questioning whether Jack was the true culprit. At the height of the controversy, approximately 70 individuals gathered in front of City Hall on September 9th to draw attention to the case and advocate for a comprehensive investigation. They established a public committee aimed at securing justice for Jack. As a result, Jack was assigned a new lawyer who swiftly petitioned for a case review. After several months, a judge dismissed Jack's original confession and ordered a new trial, putting the onus on the prosecution to establish his guilt from the beginning. This marked a daunting challenge for the prosecution, making their case almost unviable. Norman Mills, Christy's father, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway. Dissatisfied with the way the detectives had worked, Norman took matters into his own hands. Immediately after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the area where Christy was found. They discovered a bloody pair of jean shorts and men's underwear in the woods. They turned the items over to the police, who had initially missed them. It was unclear whether these items were related to the case or if they had been examined for evidence. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for the role, who they considered to be the prime suspect. The man who found Christ's body along with his wife was Henry Newell, who was 25 years old at the time of the murder. At the beginning of the trial, Jack's lawyers had amassed an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry of murder, and during the trial, the list grew even longer. Initially, Henry attracted attention because of his criminal record. Beginning in his teenage years, he had been arrested multiple times for various crimes, serving 3 prison sentences. He had successfully escaped from prison twice before being captured and brought back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for burning down a house to collect insurance money. Lawyers also reviewed evidence from Christ's case and found some very suspicious details in his testimony. Henry said he had found her body, ran over, and threw a bloody piece of wood aside. He explained this by saying that he was in a state of shock at the time, but acting like that still seemed odd. Why did he pick up the murder weapon and throw it from his body for no apparent reason? He also testified that he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he actually try to stop the bleeding, or was his shirt stained with blood during the murder, and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyer found a store clerk in the mall where Henry had run to call the police. She said he was not wearing a shirt but was wearing jean shorts, although by the time police arrived, he was wearing a different pair of pants. The employee also confirmed that Henry had a new bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately report this to the police, she said no one had asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed this bruising but ignored it. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine. Another witness was Henry's neighbor, who said that on the night of the murder, he had talked to Henry and noticed many new scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage that was the same color and shape as the cord used to tie the victim's hands. That's not all. The neighbor said that Henry had once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Chris's 14-year-old friend Carol, and that they had once swum naked together in the pool. This story shocked everyone involved in the case. It turned out that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who was also directly involved in the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court, saying everything had happened exactly as they told police on the first day. They had gone to the mall, and their son wanted to go for a walk. They went into the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point, Henry had remained at home and only stepped outside for a few minutes to scare away neighborhood children who had begun throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified, saying she had never met Henry. She was also asked about her intentions in telling Chris's mother that things should not have escalated to this point, but Carol again claimed she did not remember saying anything like that. Henry himself repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most important moments of the trial was the showing of the entire recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching it, it became clear to everyone that Jack had simply been forced to confirm the detective's words that he had committed murder. Jack barely said anything and didn't seem to fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that was not the most important moment of the trial. On the fifth day, another unexpected witness appeared. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. Bobby revealed that that day, Henry had indeed gone out of the house to chase away the children who had thrown firecrackers into the yard. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing and Henry had scars on his hands and face. Bobby was told by his parents that they would be going to the shopping center, but when they arrived, they instead took him on a walk in the woods behind the center. Bobby claims he never asked to go for a walk, which contradicts what his parents initially said. During the walk, they found Henry's torn sandal and then Christy's body. Bobby's mother instructed him not to tell anyone about what he saw. At the trial, Bobby's grandmother testified about a disturbing comment made by Henry during Christy's farewell ceremony. After expressing her sadness about Christy's death, Henry replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness, Henry's friend, came forward and said that Henry had confessed to him that he accidentally killed Christy. Although the evidence clearly pointed to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor surprisingly announced that they would not pursue a case against Henry. The prosecutor also claimed that the initial investigation was handled correctly, despite acknowledging that the police missed or ignored many clues from the beginning. The public was outraged by this decision, leading the prosecutor to change his mind 2 days later and agree to reopen the investigation into Christy's death. Christy's father refused to give up on seeking justice and filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, but not because he believed Jack was involved in the murder. Rather, he hoped to gain access to the case files and gather more information. Unfortunately, this effort also proved unsuccessful. The case had remained stagnant until February 2013, when Henry died of terminal cancer. Despite this, in the same year, former attorney John Aller became interested in the case and conducted his own investigation. He contacted all parties involved in gathering new information. Christy's relatives had provided John with a box of records that Christy's father had collected. After reviewing the records and talking to dozens of people, John believed that Henry was the culprit behind Christy's murder. John's investigation revealed that Carol had bought marijuana from Henry, which made him suspect that Henry was involved in the crime. This new discovery created a possible connection between Henry and Carol, which could explain why Carol brought Christy to the forest. One theory is that Carol planned to meet Henry in the forest to buy an illegal substance. It's possible that Carol invited Christy along, using the DJ story as a cover. A more sinister explanation suggests that Carol brought Christy to the forest at Henry's request, intending for him to harm her. However, Christy resisted, as evidenced by Henry's injuries, and he ultimately killed her. When John took over the case, Henry had passed away from cancer at the age of 63. However, John continued his work and released a book about Christy's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest, and Christy's relatives demanded that the investigation be reopened. Some of Henry's relatives also confirmed that Henry was the one who killed the girl. This led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. Detectives re-examined the evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and reassessed Henry's confession. They examined Christy's clothes and found traces of semen, but they were too small for DNA analysis. The investigation lasted until late 2015, when detectives announced that Henry was the one who had committed the crime. But because he had passed away, the case could not go to court. The investigation ended with the conclusion that Henry had left home, gone to the road behind the shopping center, seen Christy alone, and decided to assault her with a telephone cord, taking her deep into the woods. Henry had attacked Christy, injuring her. Then he killed her with a piece of wood. Returning home, Henry recounted the incident to his wife, and the two began to make plans to avoid punishment. For many years afterward, Carol never revealed the truth. Police later apologized to Christy's family for their careless handling of the incident. David Kinney was a young man who led an ordinary life. As he reached the age of 21, his mother decided to throw a big celebration in his honor. Among the guests at this party was Sherry, a beautiful single mother who attended with her sons. During the course of the evening, David found himself deeply captivated by Sherry, feeling an instant connection. The next day, he confided in his mother that he had found the love of his life and was determined to make his relationship with Sherry official. Despite Sherry's admirable qualities, some people in David's circle questioned his decision to marry a woman with 3 young children, citing the heavy responsibility it entailed for someone so young. However, David was a young man full of commitment and love. He was ready to take on the responsibilities that came with integrating into Sherry's family and building a beautiful life together. To ensure he could provide for his new family, David enrolled in a course to become a coal miner, a tough and risky job, but one that offered good pay to cover the needs of his household. It was during this training that David met Brad McGarry. Brad, born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio, had faced numerous challenges growing up. Openly gay in a conservative environment, Brad had endured insults and prejudice but had always stood firm in living his truth. Over time, he built a close-knit group of friends and pursued a career in hairstyling. Though in a small working-class town, it was a challenging profession. Eventually, Brad made the bold decision to switch careers, opting to become a coal miner despite the stark contrast to his previous work. David and Brad quickly became friends, with Brad even becoming a beloved figure in David's family, earning the affectionate nickname, Uncle Brad, from David's children. The two friends were inseparable, always sharing jokes and good times together. By 2017, David was 30 years old, happily married to Sherry, and their children were growing up. Brad, on the other hand, was balancing his work, family time, and a secret romance. On May 7, 2017, after attending a family gathering, Brad told a cousin that he needed to return to his home for a meeting. Later that day, around 6:15 p.m., David, Sherry, and their youngest daughter stopped by Brad's house. They were surprised when Brad didn't answer the door even though his car was parked outside. Concerned, they went around to the back of the house and found the service door unlocked. After calling out to Brad without a response, David entered the house while Sherry searched upstairs. David's search led him to the basement where he was met with a horrifying sight: Brad's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Sherry, responding to her husband's scream, rushed downstairs and was equally shocked by the grim scene. Sherry immediately called 911, and the police were soon alerted to the discovery of Brad's body, the victim of a fatal gunshot wound. When the police arrived, they found David and Sherry visibly shaken, recounting their story of how they had come to check on their friend and were met with a terrible tragedy. The couple explained their close relationship with Brad, emphasizing the deep bond that had formed over the years. The Kinney family shared that they often spent holidays with Brad, and their children loved him like an uncle. They had even planned a trip to the Bahamas with him in August. When asked about any enemies or troubling circumstances in Brad's life, David and Sherry mentioned that Brad had recently ended a tumultuous relationship with a man named Scotty, although they didn't know his last name. They described the relationship as fraught with conflict, with frequent heated arguments. After gathering as much information as possible from the witnesses, the officers began to thoroughly examine the scene before drawing any conclusions. In the basement, they found Brad's body lying face down on the floor with a large pool of blood surrounding his head. At first glance, it was clear that he had been shot at least once in the head. Despite the obvious signs, the officers initially speculated that Brad might have been going through a difficult time and possibly taken his own life. When the forensic expert arrived at the scene, he asked the officers if they had found a weapon, to which they replied that they had not. However, since it's common for individuals who take their own lives to fall on the weapon, the forensic team decided to turn the body over. Upon doing so, they found no weapon, quickly dispelling the initial suicide theory. As they continued to survey the house, the police tried to piece together the crime scene. They noticed that the house seemed to have been ransacked in a peculiar way. The kitchen was in disarray with several drawers left open, and the living room was also in a state of chaos. The authorities initially suspected that Brad's death might have been the result of a robbery gone wrong. However, after conducting a more thorough inspection, the detectives realized that no valuable items had been stolen despite there being several worth taking. They also noted that Brad was a collector of rural style art, and his home contained many valuable items. If the intruder had been a common thief, it was also odd that the television remained in place and there was money scattered on the floor. Considering all these clues, the police became convinced that the robbery was staged to mislead them. Given that Brad was an openly gay man working in a coal mine, the detectives considered the possibility that he might have upset some of his more conservative coworkers, potentially leading to a hate crime. However, when they spoke with his colleagues at the mine, they were surprised to find that everyone respected and admired Brad, describing him as a good man. This theory was quickly discarded. The detectives also interviewed Brad's friends and family, trying to establish a timeline and gather as much information as possible. According to David and Sherry's statement at the scene, Brad had recently ended a toxic relationship with a man named Scotty, which was confirmed by Brad's friend, Wendy. Wendy told the police that she had also been against the relationship, noting that Brad had become too involved with Scotty, and things had started to get very strange. Following this lead, the detectives obtained the full name of Scotty and immediately went to his house to question him. However, when they arrived, Scotty's mother informed them that he had been in jail for 3 months for violating his probation. While this ruled out Scotty as the perpetrator, the detectives did not completely dismiss him as a suspect. They theorized that he might have orchestrated the crime from behind bars with the help of an accomplice. The police visited Scotty in jail to inform him of his ex-boyfriend's death and gauge his reaction. Scotty seemed genuinely shaken by the news, and by the end of the interview, the detectives had nearly ruled out his involvement in the crime. Desperate for answers, the detectives decided to canvass the neighborhood to see if any cameras had captured footage near Brad's house. Fortunately, a neighbor had a camera facing the street close to Brad's home, which could potentially reveal who had come and gone. While they began reviewing the hours of footage, they continued interviewing friends and family. The case seemed to be reaching a dead end until 2 days later, when the detectives interviewed a cousin of Brad, whose testimony shifted the investigation. He revealed that on the day of the incident, Brad had left the family lunch gathering between 1:30 and 2 p.m., but not before mentioning that a man named DJ was supposed to visit his house. He added that Brad had jokingly said he was planning to take a nap with his guest, hinting at a romantic intention. He further disclosed that Brad had confided in her that the man he was seeing was married and had not yet come out to his wife about their homosexual relationship. He also told the detectives that the relationship with DJ had been ongoing for years and that they had managed to keep it under wraps. Despite being reluctant to reveal the true identity of Brad's lover, he finally gave in under the pressure of the lead investigator, dropping a bombshell name. The officer was stunned to hear that DJ was actually David, the very man who had discovered Brad's lifeless body. When asked if she was certain about her statements, he confirmed that David was indeed the only man Brad had ever mentioned to her. The detectives later commented that when they discovered DJ was David, the person who had found the body while visiting the house with his family, everything suddenly became clear. Up until that point, David had been viewed as a significant witness in the case, appearing genuinely shaken and grieving over his friend's death. This unexpected twist in the story, however, instantly turned him into the prime suspect. The detectives, under the guise of needing to retrieve photos from his phone related to the crime scene, convinced David to hand over his device. In reality, they were tracking his location during the time Brad was killed and searching for evidence that might confirm a relationship beyond mere friendship. When they reviewed the phone's location data, they discovered that David's phone had been at Brad's house at the time of the fatal shooting. Although David had deleted incriminating messages, a deeper forensic analysis uncovered text messages between him and Brad that confirmed their sexual relationship. Meanwhile, the team reviewing the footage from Brad's neighbor's surveillance camera found that David had indeed driven to Brad's house just before the estimated time of the attack. Notably, he had arrived in his wife's car, not his own. They documented the duration of his visit, noting that he left about 40 minutes later. The footage also captured David returning hours later in his truck, accompanied by his family, under the pretense of delivering a weed trimmer that Brad had supposedly requested. After compiling all this evidence, the police were confident they had enough to prove that David had been at Brad's house both before and during the time of his death. It was time to confront him with the truth. When the detectives presented David with the damning data retrieved from his phone, he admitted to being at the house but changed his story multiple times during the lengthy interrogation, offering up to 7 or 8 different versions of events. At one point, David claimed that a third unidentified man had been in Brad's house. And after a heated argument, this unknown individual shot Brad. He insisted that the man had threatened him into silence before allowing him to leave. However, the detective made it clear that he didn't believe the story, prompting David to alter his account once again. When pressed to tell the truth, David eventually confessed to hiding his affair from his wife, Sherry, but insisted that it had only been going on for a few months, not years. He claimed that Brad had not been pressuring him to leave his wife and move in together, but had grown angry when David tried to end their romantic relationship that afternoon. David alleged that Brad had brandished a gun, waving it in his face, which terrified him. He said the argument escalated into a physical struggle during which he managed to wrestle the gun away and shot Brad in the forehead, asserting that he had acted in self-defense. David also admitted to firing another shot at Brad while he was on the ground. The detectives quickly refuted this version of events, pointing out that the basic laws of physics made David's account impossible. The forensic analysis of Brad's body revealed that he had been shot twice, both times in the back of the head, indicating that the shooter had been standing behind him. When asked about the weapon, David claimed he had disposed of it while fleeing the scene. Law enforcement officers were seen combing the area in the days that followed, but the murder weapon was never recovered. Despite the missing weapon, the investigators were certain they had their man. Before taking David to jail, they allowed him to speak with his wife. The conversation between David and Sherry was closely observed by the detectives. David confessed to Sherry about the affair and expressed regret for not handling things differently, admitting that he couldn't undo what had been done. Sherry, shocked by the enormity of his revelation, was left speechless. David reiterated to her what he had told the detectives. Sherry, through tears, asked him if he was mocking her with such an explanation and said she couldn't even bear to look at him. This conversation confirmed to the police that Sherry had no prior knowledge of the events that had transpired behind her back. On May 9th, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators hypothesized that Brad, frustrated with keeping their relationship a secret, had likely threatened to reveal the truth to Sherry, giving David the motive to kill his friend and maintain his double life. After several days in custody, David appeared in court for a marathon preliminary hearing held in mid-May 2017. There, he faced charges for the murder of Brad. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor as the investigating officers testified, and the prosecutors focused on the inconsistencies in the story he had told them. The police described how David had appeared visibly distraught at the scene of Brad's murder, experiencing physical discomfort, including trouble breathing and episodes of vomiting. He also recounted David's initial written statement in which he claimed to be a simple friend who had gone to deliver a weed trimmer and had inadvertently discovered Brad's lifeless body in the basement. The lead investigator presented David's final statement in which he confessed to shooting Brad in self-defense with a weapon that, despite exhaustive efforts, was never found. The autopsy results were a critical turning point that completely dismantled David's self-defense claim, as they showed that the victim, Brad, had been shot twice in the back of the head, which was inconsistent with an act of self-defense. David's defense attorney addressed the court, arguing that David did not pose a threat to society and that the tragic events leading to Brad's death were the result of unique circumstances. He asserted that if a crime had been committed, it was manslaughter, not murder, and claimed that David had acted in self-defense. Meanwhile, David remained silent during the nearly 3-hour hearing where witnesses took the stand. After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies, the judge found probable cause to send the case to the county court and set bail at $1 million. David's defense immediately requested a reduction in the bail amount, arguing that it was impossible for David to pay. However, the judge denied the request. Several weeks later, David's defense attorney filed more than a dozen motions during a hearing. Among these motions was another request to reduce David's bail. Numerous friends and family members of David attended the hearing to show their support. The lawyer asked that the bail be reduced to $250,000, an amount that the Kinney family could manage. He called several witnesses to the stand, including David's wife, his mother, his father-in-law, and his stepfather. All of them testified to David's good character, describing him as an honorable, hardworking, and responsible man as well as a loving husband and father. Sherry testified that her husband had provided emotional and material support to their 3 children for the past 10 years, even though he was not their biological father. During cross-examination, Sherry was questioned about the events of May 7th when David took her and their daughter to Brad's house. She said her husband told her they were going to return a weed trimmer. When asked by the judge if her husband had acted strangely that day, Sherry said she did not notice anything unusual at the house. She described how they arrived, knocked on the door, found the back door open, and entered the house, which appeared to have been ransacked before David went to the basement and shouted for her to call 911. After hearing all the arguments, the judge concluded that the testimonies regarding David's character did not justify a reduction in bail. He based his decision on the fact that the defendant had taken his wife and daughter to a house where a dead body was present under the pretense that he was just passing by and was unaware of what had happened. The judge added that David had blatantly lied to his wife and daughter. Later, David's trial began and lasted for a week. During the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence we've already discussed, such as the neighbor's surveillance video showing David arriving at Brad's house before the time of the crime and returning later with his family. The prosecution also showed police body cam footage that clearly demonstrated David had been lying from the start. One of the most striking pieces of testimony came from a forensic expert who discussed the DNA evidence found at the scene. The expert revealed that DNA from a used condom showed Brad's DNA on the outside and the DNA of an unknown male on the inside. But there was no trace of David's DNA. This revelation was controversial because it contradicted the accusations made by a detective who believed that David had decided Brad had to die to keep his secret and his family life intact. According to the detective, David had lured Brad with the promise of sex, killed him, and then covered up the crime as best he could. Meanwhile, the defense maintained that David had acted out of fear and in self-defense. Although the defense attorney admitted that David had not always told the truth and that some of his actions were odd, he reiterated that this did not make David a criminal. The prosecution countered that 2 bullets to the back of the head were not acts of self-defense, pointing out that Brad had been on his knees when he received the first shot to the upper part of his head and the second to the lower part of his skull. After hearing the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Tension filled the courtroom as the jury returned. And when the judge read the unanimous verdict, they found David Kinney guilty of the aggravated murder of Brad. The verdict was met with gasps and tears from those present. Before his sentence was handed down, David was given the opportunity to speak. He began by apologizing to Brad's family for all the pain and suffering he had caused. He said he never intended for any of this to happen and wished he could take it all back. David acknowledged that no amount of apologies could ever bring Brad back, but he wanted the family to know that he truly regretted everything that had occurred. However, the judge was unmoved by David's apologies. The judge recounted the numerous lies David had told to cover up his actions and stated that the crime was a cold and calculated execution followed by an elaborate cover-up. The judge said that David had premeditated Brad's murder, luring him with the promise of sex, setting up the crime scene, and taking multiple steps to conceal his crime. The judge had 4 sentencing options, all involving life imprisonment but varying in the possibility of parole after 20, 25, or 30 years. David's defense attorney urged the judge to choose one of these options, arguing that David had been a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record before the tragic events of that day. However, the prosecutor urged the judge to impose life without parole, emphasizing that Brad had lost his life and that his family would have to live with that loss forever. In response, the judge stated that if David was capable of ending the life of someone who loved him and was his best friend, it raised concerns about what he might do to someone who opposed him. Therefore, he could not allow David to ever return to public life. In February 2018, David was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole with an additional 3 years for a firearm specification, meaning he had possessed a weapon while committing the crime. The police remarked that the entire case was a tragedy that could have been avoided if David had not been so concerned with keeping his homosexuality a secret. As of mid-2023, prison records indicated that David remained incarcerated in Ohio. From the moment of his conviction, his attorney had tried to appeal the sentence, always seeking the possibility of parole for his client, but those appeals had been denied. Tragically, While David would never return to the coal mines, Brad would not either, as both their lives had been irreversibly altered by David's actions. The case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978, in Columbia, South Carolina, United States. She grew up in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. Known for her cheerful and outgoing personality, Danielle faced adulthood early. At the age of 16, she became pregnant but was determined to be a good mother. Danielle's relationship with Carl, the father of her child, ended in divorce. In 1996, she gave birth to her son Tristan at the age of 17, and despite the difficulties ahead, Danielle was determined to provide the best life for herself and her son. Then she met Luis Payano, a man who would become Tristan's father. Danielle and Luis had known each other since they were teenagers, initially as friends, but their relationship developed into love. Luis took care of Danielle and Tristan, and for a time it seemed like all their problems had been solved. The couple moved in together, and Danielle secured an office job at a landscaping company, a position she was proud to have obtained. In December 1998, Luis proposed to Danielle, and she happily accepted. Her life was on the right track, with a loving son, a fiancé, and promising career prospects. On March 15, 1999, Luis returned home from work to find his fiancée, 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, lying lifeless on the bed in their Ashley Lakes apartment in Norcross, Georgia. Their young son, Tristan, was at daycare at the time. Luis immediately realized Danielle was dead due to her skin color and called 911. When the police arrived, Luis was waiting for them and reported what he had found. He explained that upon entering the apartment, he saw Danielle lying face down on the bed, and when he turned her over, he discovered she was dead. The police naturally suspected Luis, and they took him in for questioning while a team of officers thoroughly examined the crime scene. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed, fully clothed with a sock around her neck. This suggested that the perpetrator intended to kill her, leaving no chance for survival. The fact that the stocking was tied at the back indicated that the perpetrator was behind Danielle when they strangled her. The crime scene showed signs of disarray, with the bed messed up and a dresser drawer open. It's possible that the perpetrator took the stocking from Danielle's drawer. The contents of her purse had been dumped and rummaged through, leading police to consider the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. However, several valuable items, including cameras and jewelry, were left untouched. This led police to speculate that the perpetrator may have intended to steal something but encountered Danielle and decided to kill her to avoid being identified as a witness. The lack of forced entry at the front door and the locked sliding glass door in the backyard raised suspicions that the crime scene might have been staged. Despite searching the surrounding area, police found no evidence. After investigating the crime scene, police discovered that Danielle may have let the killer into her home voluntarily, or that the killer had a key to the apartment. As a result, the prime suspect became Danielle's fiancé, Luis Payano. When police started questioning Luis, he displayed intense emotions. The police were aware that romantic relationships can sometimes escalate into anger, leading to devastating consequences. To begin the interrogation, they asked Luis about his whereabouts on the day of Danielle's death. Luis claimed he spent the entire day at work. He last saw Danielle when they both left their apartment at 6:45 a.m., but she returned briefly to retrieve something. According to Luis, Danielle was anxious about an important meeting with management at work and seemed slightly distracted. He also mentioned that Danielle called him at 11:30 a.m. to invite him to lunch, but he declined due to his heavy workload. Luis tried to contact Danielle later that day but couldn't reach her. Concerned, he called her coworkers, who told him she had gone out for lunch but failed to return to work. Luis then contacted their home, where he spoke to someone named Lisa, who also hadn't heard from Danielle. Luis left work to check on Danielle at their home in the Ashley Lakes apartments. When he arrived, he found something unsettling. The front door was unlocked. Upon entering, he saw a jar on the floor. During the investigation into Danielle's death, police questioned Luis about his relationship with her. They asked if the couple had frequent arguments or domestic problems. Luis insisted that their relationship was good and that they loved each other very much. Clearly feeling confused, he became frustrated with the questioning, believing that the police were wasting their time by focusing on him. He insisted that they should find the real culprit, who was still at large. Police also spoke to Danielle's friends and family, all of whom sided with Luis. Luis and Danielle were madly in love and were planning their wedding. However, their happiness did not last long. During the investigation into Danielle's case, Luis's co-workers confirmed that he had been at work all day, providing him with a solid alibi and eliminating him as a suspect. During the interrogation, Luis said that Danielle's co-worker Jeff was showing her too much attention and she was unhappy about it. The police immediately went to Danielle's workplace and spoke to her boss. Danielle's boss confirmed to the police that Danielle had complained about an employee named Jeff. Jeff was a middle-aged man who was a manager at the company. Danielle complained to her boss that Jeff was constantly hanging around her, interfering with her work, and behaving inappropriately. There was a significant age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40 years old and she was 20. Jeff invited Danielle to lunch and Danielle told him that she had a fiancé. She refused to go to lunch with Jeff. The company where Danielle worked took her complaints seriously. On the day of her murder, she had a meeting regarding a complaint she had filed with management against Jeff. She was very nervous about it. She feared that her career might be in jeopardy because she was a new employee and Jeff was her manager. Her co-workers mentioned that Danielle had gone home for lunch after this meeting but had not returned. That gave the police a time frame for when Danielle's attack occurred. The investigation revealed Jeff's involvement, especially when it was discovered that he was absent from the office at the time of the crime and did not return until later in the evening. Police focused on Jeff as a suspect, possibly following Danielle home and attacking her when she opened the door, which would explain the lack of signs of entry. Jeff was called in for questioning and asked to describe his relationship with Danielle. He admitted that he invited her to lunch but denied his involvement in her death. Jeff didn't deny liking her. However, he claimed he had not behaved inappropriately towards Danielle and was surprised when she filed a complaint against him. The investigators asked him if Danielle's complaint was a reason for wanting to harm her. His first reaction to this question was anger. He was adamant that he wasn't the one who took her life. Jeff claimed that he couldn't have been the one who attacked Danielle because he had an alibi. According to him, he was with another colleague, and they were driving around the city solving some work issues. They had been together all day, so he couldn't be the one who took Danielle's life. Jeff told investigators the name of the coworker whom he claimed he was with at the time of the crime. The detectives met with this man, and he confirmed Jeff's words. Thus, they excluded another person from the list of suspects. The next day, investigators received the autopsy report and examined it in the hope of getting some clues that would help them track down the perpetrator. The cause of Danielle's death was asphyxia. It seemed evident that Danielle's attack had taken her by surprise. The investigators concluded that someone had come up to her from behind and pulled the stocking tight until she lost consciousness. After that, the perpetrator tied the stocking in a knot so Danielle could not regain consciousness. There were no defensive injuries on her body. In fact, there were no injuries at all except for the ligature mark on her neck. Perhaps Danielle didn't even see the face of the one who attacked her. The police found no evidence at the crime scene that could help identify the perpetrator. No shoe prints, no DNA, no fingerprints, no hair. There was no evidence to send to the laboratory for analysis. Since the police had no new suspects, they returned to the version that what happened was a robbery that went wrong. They asked Louise to go through the apartment with them again. He carefully examined everything and said that nothing was missing from the apartment. All the things seemed to be in their usual places. However, a few days later, Lou called the police and said he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. He also drew the attention of investigators to another strange detail. The stocking that someone strangled Danielle with did not belong to her. According to Louise, she didn't wear stockings at all. It meant that whoever had done it had brought the stocking with them. Lacking any evidence, the investigators decided to look into Danielle's past. Perhaps what happened to her was connected with her past. They asked her friends about her previous relationships, in particular, her relationship with Carl, the father of her son Tristan. Her best friend told the police about Danielle's ex-boyfriend Eddie. She started dating him when she was already pregnant. Eddie was a violent guy, and as their relationship progressed, he became more domineering and tried to control all aspects of her life. It got to the point where he forbade her to see her friends and family. The relationship with Eddie deteriorated even more after Danielle gave birth to her son. Soon after, Eddie started using illegal substances, and Danielle decided it was time to end this relationship. She moved out and tried to start a new life, but Eddie had other plans. He did not accept rejection and behaved unpredictably. As a result, Danielle had to seek a restraining order against him. He violated it several times, called Danielle, parked near her house, and once even showed up at her work. Danielle's family told investigators that Eddie had called her several times in recent months. He told her to meet with him, but she always hung up. Eddie was the perfect suspect, so detectives tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. The man was hostile, and he wasn't eager to go to the police station. However, Eddie had an alibi. He said that Eddie was towing cars out of state at the time of the murder and that Eddie's boss, along with service logs and other receipts, could back him up. When the police confirmed his alibi, they released Eddie. 3 days after Danielle died, Danielle's neighbor, Kirk, called the police and told them about something that had happened to Kirk the week before the murder. Miss Kirk said that recently in the apartment complex, residents often encounter a maintenance worker. The maintenance worker said he came to do a repair order. However, Miss Kirk said that she felt very uncomfortable the whole time he was there because he kept staring at Kirk, as if he was more concerned with her than completing the repair order. The same thing happened to another woman. The maintenance worker insisted that he was there to change a light bulb when the landlord said there were no bulbs to change. He mumbled and staggered, "Maybe I have the wrong apartment," then backed up and walked away. Police investigations revealed that the complex had several maintenance workers, but the one who matched the descriptions of both women was Calvin Oliver, 42. According to records, Calvin had only started working at the complex in September 1998. At the time of Danielle's murder, 10 residents had reported cash, checks, and other valuables, including jewelry, computers, and guns, missing from their apartments without evidence of forced entry. Some even suggested that someone on the maintenance staff was responsible. Calvin Oliver was brought in for questioning by the police, who initially asked him about a series of burglaries at the Ashley Lakes apartments. Calvin denied any involvement in the burglaries. When asked about Danielle Jennings, he said he had heard about what happened to her but did not know her. The only thing he confessed was that he had worked in her apartment. The police were about to release Calvin for lack of concrete evidence when they ran a final check of Calvin's database. The results were horrifying. They discovered that Calvin had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear in court on a theft charge related to the theft of a personal check. According to Georgia Department of Correction records, Calvin had a long-standing adult criminal record dating back to 1974. His convictions included multiple residential burglaries, armed robbery, robbery by force, and at least one count of forcibly pressuring a woman into intimate contact at knife point. As a result, Calvin spent the majority of his life incarcerated. Given his extensive criminal history, it's surprising he was able to get a job at Ashley Lakes Apartments. The police took Calvin Oliver into custody, which allowed them to thoroughly investigate his potential involvement in Danielle Jennings's death. As part of their ongoing inquiry into a string of thefts at Ashley Lakes' apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. During the search, they discovered stolen items from other residents, and the police discovered Danielle's wedding ring in his home. This discovery directly linked Oliver to Danielle's death. When the police questioned him about the wedding ring, Calvin claimed that he had stolen it about 3 weeks before Danielle's death. However, this claim was proven false. Calvin became a suspect and refused to cooperate with police after being caught lying. At trial, the prosecution argued that Calvin killed Danielle after she caught him breaking into her home. After a 5-day trial that ended on October 13, 2000, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. As a result, Calvin Oliver received a life sentence for the murder of Danielle Jennings and an additional 20 years for the burglary. A subsequent investigation revealed that Ashley Lake Apartments management knew about Calviner's history of run-ins with the law and his lengthy criminal record. Despite this knowledge, they failed to conduct thorough background checks and failed to warn other residents when a series of burglaries occurred. When these facts came to light, Danielle's family filed a lawsuit against Ashley Lake Apartments that they argue that the evidence demonstrates a reckless disregard for the safety of others. After a trial, a jury returned a verdict of more than $13 million for Danielle's wrongful death. The complex's key policy was also flawed, prosecutors said. Employees had access to house keys, and the lockboxes containing keys to the complex's 240 apartments were often left unsecured. Calvin Oliver is now serving a life sentence in prison. Joshua Hilberling was born on May 30, 1988 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was the son of Gene and Patrick Hilberling and had 5 siblings: Zach, Scott, David, Carrie, and Nikki Ross. Growing up in a large family, Joshua's childhood was lively and joyful, filled with games invented by his siblings. He was especially close to Zach, who was just 13 months younger, and they shared a strong bond with Zach often emulating Joshua. Patrick, a veteran of the Air Force, instilled values of integrity and commitment in his children. Joshua attended Victoria Christian High School, where he excelled in sports, particularly football. He was also known for his friendly and charming personality, enjoying video games and family time. In February 2007, after completing his studies, Joshua followed in his father's footsteps and joined the United States Air Force. In early 2010, he met Amber, whom he believed to be the love of his life. Amber reciprocated his feelings, and their relationship blossomed quickly. Amber was born on October 1, 1991 in Joplin, Missouri. Her family moved to Tulsa 3 months after her birth, where they later welcomed 2 more children, Adam and Ariel. Amber, with her beautiful long blonde hair, attended Skelly Elementary School. She was not only beautiful but also intelligent and dedicated, consistently ranking among the top students. During her school years, she participated in various outdoor activities, excelling in soccer, volleyball, track, and dance. She was also a member of an American nonprofit organization that promotes and supports agricultural education. After her parents' divorce, Amber's mother remarried a well-known local surgeon. He embraced Amber as his own daughter. Amber was a devout churchgoer and a voracious reader and movie enthusiast, often quoting films to the fascination of those around her. She also had a keen interest in history and wrote many eloquent poems. Amber had a passion for fashion, makeup, and shoes. When Joshua and Amber met, she was 18 and living with her mother and stepfather. Their relationship progressed quickly, and when Joshua, then 22, learned he would be stationed in Alaska in 6 months, they decided to marry so she could accompany him. They wed in the 2010 in a beautiful ceremony, with one of Joshua's brothers serving as the best man. Shortly after, the newlyweds moved to Fairbanks, Alaska. Despite their excitement, they soon faced unforeseen challenges. Their youth, inexperience, and the isolation of their new home led to frequent arguments, as Amber herself later recounted. Her husband also developed the habit of breaking her cell phone so that she couldn't communicate when he wasn't home. Although there are versions that suggest she had a fiery temperament, as often happens in relationships, especially in extreme cases, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Despite their tumultuous relationship, they remained in love and soon discovered they were expecting their first child. However, on January 2, 2011, base officials received a report from Amber alleging that her husband had assaulted her. She told the officers that they began arguing after she wanted to order takeout, which he refused, leading to insults. While Amber was preparing dinner, Joshua approached her, throwing a drink in a plate from her hand. He then grabbed her right breast, causing bruising and broken blood vessels. These details were recorded in the military report, and photographs of the injuries were taken to document the case leading to Joshua's arrest. The incident occurred in the first trimester of Amber's pregnancy, and she ultimately decided not to press charges. 5 months later, Things worsened when Joshua was unexpectedly and disgracefully discharged from the Air Force due to misconduct involving drug use as shown in records. As a result, Joshua and his beautiful wife packed their bags once more and returned to Tulsa. Despite their rocky relationship, Amber and Joshua were excited about their baby's impending arrival, a joy shared by their families. The couple temporarily moved into Amber's mother's home while making permanent housing arrangements and preparing for the birth. However, this arrangement was short-lived. Joshua's issues extended to his in-laws, who accused him of substance abuse and demanded that he leave. Although Amber was welcome to stay, she chose to go with him. Concerned for her daughter's and grandchild's well-being, Rhonda, Amber's mother, generously allowed them to stay in one of her properties, an apartment on the 25th floor of University Club Tower, a unique 32-story cylindrical building. Amber's maternal grandmother also lived in one of the units. The building, constructed in 1966, was the first major U.S. structure designed using computerization for structural calculations, ensuring it was strong enough to withstand wind sway. When the young couple moved in, the facade and glass curtain wall panels were 46 years old, and the building did not meet modern construction standards. Moving there did not bring peace or relief to their marriage. The arguments continued, exacerbated by Joshua's frequent nighttime outings. He would leave Amber alone in the apartment and take the car her mother had lent them, meant for Amber's use in case of emergencies with her advanced pregnancy. Records show numerous text messages from Amber to Joshua, pleading for him to return home and fulfill his family responsibilities, but he repeatedly refused. By this time, their families and friends had taken sides, each blaming the other. Amidst accusations and gossip, there were frequent suggestions that they should separate for their own good. In early June 2011, with Amber 7 months pregnant, the couple seriously considered divorce, making their home environment even more unbearable. The situation escalated to the point where one of them threw a TV out the bedroom window, shattering it. When they informed the building manager about the broken window, they were told they had to pay for the damage. On Tuesday, June 7, 2011, with the divorce papers on a table in their apartment, Joshua decided to skip Amber's biological father's wedding that weekend. Instead, Joshua chose to go with his friends to a music festival in Tennessee. According to Amber, he planned to use and sell drugs at the event. Upset about his imminent absence at such an important family event and his dubious intentions, Amber reacted badly. After a heated exchange, she continued packing laundry to take to her grandmother's house since their apartment lacked a washer and dryer. In a fit of rage, she began pulling her husband's dirty clothes out of the basket. At that moment, the professional hired to repair the broken window knocked on the door. Upon entering, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. When he quoted a repair cost of $150, the couple started arguing again. Joshua considered fixing it himself, but ultimately agreed it was best for the professional to handle it. With his belongings packed, Joshua asked his father to pick him up, but his father said it wasn't possible. Consequently, Joshua turned to his friends for help. One of them, Brandon, agreed to come but didn't realize the urgency of the request. Soon after, the situation between Joshua and Amber escalated into even more violence. Exactly what happened next is a mystery both took to their graves. On the afternoon of Tuesday, June 7, 2011, while they were arguing in the living room, 23-year-old Joshua inexplicably fell against the window, which shattered on impact. Amber watched in horror as her husband plummeted from the 25th floor. The professional working on the other broken window in the bedroom heard the crash and rushed to the living room. Initially, given the heated argument he had overheard, he thought Joshua had jumped intentionally. According to his later testimony, Amber was completely distraught, crying and frantically saying Joshua had fallen and needed help. She then ran out the apartment door. Across the street, Robert, a resident, was smoking a cigarette when he saw Joshua fall and land face down on the 8th floor parking garage, his head against the railing. It took nearly 3 seconds for Joshua to hit the ground, resulting in an instant death. Robert ran towards the apartment complex while the manager tried to contact Armando, the professional fixing the window. Meanwhile, Amber frantically pressed the elevator buttons to get to the first floor, searching desperately for Joshua. When she couldn't find him, she looked toward the 8th floor parking garage and realized what had happened. She ran to the elevator again, this time accompanied by the building manager who urged her to remain calm to avoid causing a bigger scene. Upon reaching Joshua's lifeless body, Amber understood the gravity of the situation. Paramedics, firefighters, and authorities arrived, alerted by several neighbors. Amid tears and screams, Amber repeatedly begged them to save him, but it was clear there was nothing they could do. Amber kept saying she hadn't meant for this to happen. Although one of the firefighters heard her mention, it was never her intention for things to escalate so severely. The police escorted Amber to the Tulsa police station as a formality to ask standard questions and try to piece together the events of that day. Amber requested to wait for her grandmother before going. At that point, the authorities were uncertain about what exactly had happened in the couple's apartment. Unbeknownst to Amber, her life was about to change dramatically, not only because she was now a widow, but in many other aspects. Once at the station, the police placed Amber and her grandmother in a room where they were alone. They were asked to remain calm as someone would be with them shortly. What they didn't realize was that the room was equipped with recording devices. Every word they spoke during that time was captured. Additionally, an on-duty officer observed all their actions in real time. Amid her utter shock, Amber tearfully told her grandmother that while they were arguing in the living room, she went to the bedroom. And upon returning, she pushed Joshua towards the wall in response to his insults. He stumbled, tried to catch himself, but ultimately fell through the window. At one point, she told her grandmother that Joshua's parents were right when they repeatedly claimed that if they stayed together, she would eventually cause his death. Amber couldn't stop lamenting the fatal outcome she had caused. Her grandmother was aware that Amber's in-laws would relentlessly pursue her, so she urged her to stay strong, especially for her unborn child. Despite following her grandmother's advice to remain silent without legal representation, the police still arrested Amber as a suspect. The next day, after securing a lawyer, her mother paid the bail, and Amber was released. As the investigation continued, Joshua's memorial service was held on the morning of Saturday, June 11, 2011. Instead of flowers, the family requested memorial contributions in Joshua's name. From that point on, each family accused the other spouse of violence. Amber's claim of self-defense against an abusive husband was quickly overshadowed by the aggressive public campaign launched by Joshua's relatives and friends. The media sided with the Hilberlings, portraying Amber as a mentally unstable criminal and Joshua as a gentleman driven to madness by her. Websites appeared where anonymous people called for Amber's execution and strangers harassed her family. On August 6, 2011, while awaiting a complex and controversial trial, Amber gave birth to her son. Close friends described him as a beautiful blend of his parents. Amber and her lawyers rejected 2 plea deals offered by the district attorney's office. One deal was a 5-year prison sentence plus 15 years of probation, and the other was 7 years in prison with 13 years suspended. Amber later told a major American media outlet that she did not regret her decision as she was confident in her innocence and willing to take any risk to prove it. These decisions led to her being tried for second-degree murder. When Amber began attending court hearings in fitted jackets, impeccably made up and sporting disheveled blonde hair, the public and press used these details to confirm their preconceived notions about her. Meanwhile, she cherished every moment with her young son, finding peace and watching him grow amidst the chaos surrounding her case, which seemed focused on her family's financial means to evade justice. On the opposite side of her, many detractors was a page created by those who believed in her innocence. Although fewer, these supporters extensively discussed on social media the records of domestic violence perpetrated by Joshua. They also posted text messages from Amber's phone, supposedly from conversations with her husband the day before his death. On September 19, 2012, Amber filed a lawsuit against University Club Tower claiming that Joshua's death resulted from the condominium's negligence. The document alleged that Joshua's fatal fall occurred because the window did not meet the glass requirements stipulated by Tulsa's building code. 6 months later, Amber's trial commenced. During her testimony, Amber told the jury that when she entered the living room, Joshua stepped away from the window and walked toward her. It was then, according to her, that he grabbed her shoulders with both hands. Fearing the worst, she pushed him hard against the wall between the chandeliers and the TV. To better explain, Amber drew a diagram of the push, and the court allowed her to stand in the witness box to demonstrate. The deputy district attorney began her cross-examination, making it clear to the jury that they did not need to believe Amber intended to kill her husband to convict her of the charge. They only needed to be certain that her act was extremely dangerous to another person. She added that the incident evidenced a depraved mindset. In this context, the video of Amber's conversation with her grandmother at the police station where she admitted her guilt was a key piece of evidence presented by the prosecution despite the defense's efforts to suppress it. Additionally, the prosecutors called witnesses who claimed to have heard sounds of a struggle in the apartment, including heavy footsteps moving towards the window area. Their hypothesis suggested that Amber, despite her advanced pregnancy, had attacked her nearly 6-foot, 220-pound husband in a fit of rage, pushing him through the glass. Armando testified about what he heard and saw that day, as did the firefighter at the scene who mentioned that Amber repeatedly said she didn't mean to push her husband out the window. An expert in windows and glass was called as a defense witness. He explained that the window in question was made of annealed glass, which lacked the strength required for residential use. He asserted that if the window had been made of safety glass, Joshua might not have fallen through it, as tempered glass is 4 times more resistant to wind loads and twice as resistant to impacts as regular annealed glass. In his expert opinion, the domestic dispute put the victim in contact with weak, unsafe, and poorly supported glass, compounded by other factors like the building's poor condition and wind pressures pushing the glass and Joshua outward. Despite the defense's considerable efforts, the jury took only 3 hours to find Amber guilty of second-degree murder. On March 18, 2013, the judge sentenced Amber to 25 years in prison for the crime against her husband. Additionally, she was fined $10,000 and ordered to reimburse over $6,000 in funeral expenses paid by Joshua's family. According to Oklahoma law, after 1 year, the judge could suspend part or all of the sentence, potentially granting Amber less time behind bars. Otherwise, she had to serve at least 85% of her sentence, or 21 years, before being eligible for parole. Amber's son, then 6 years old, was legally placed under the care of his grandmother, Rhonda, and her husband. They regularly visited Amber in prison. A couple of months after the sentencing, a well-known American presenter traveled to the correctional center to interview Amber. The program aired in 2016. During the televised interview, Amber admitted to yelling at her husband, calling him a coward during the argument that led to his fatal fall, but she continued to insist on her innocence. The special, which included interviews with family members, police personnel, and various experts, reignited public interest in the case and the controversial verdict. The passage of time did little to lessen the controversy surrounding the story. The flame was further fanned when the state Supreme Court questioned the tactics used to prosecute Amber. Rhonda blamed the Hillburlings' high profile in Tulsa for creating and fostering certain prejudices against her daughter. Later, rumors of Amber's alleged misconduct while in custody brought her back into sensationalist headlines. The lawsuit against University Club Tower was dismissed in March 2015. Amber died in prison on October 24, 2016 at the age of 26. The coroner's report noted scars on her wrists and forearms and methamphetamine in her blood. According to the coroner, Amber had taken her own life. Later, her parents appeared on television claiming they believed their daughter had been killed by someone else. The Oklahoma Department of Corrections was sued for failing to take reasonable measures to prevent or address the conditions that led Amber to such a drastic decision while in custody. The lawsuit filed by her heirs in Oklahoma County District Court sought $75,000 in compensation. A spokesperson for the prison system stated that the agency does not comment on pending litigation. The outcome of that lawsuit, if any, has not been disclosed. Rhonda, Amber's mother, later remarked that despite the tragic end that no one in the family desired, her daughter had finally found peace. She also announced that she would ensure her grandson had a fulfilling life. This case highlights the severe issue of domestic violence in the United States. The Hillburlings had reported each other to the authorities multiple times, showing injuries that confirmed their claims. However, they failed to end their toxic relationship, leading to a doubly tragic conclusion. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.